Ladies and lads, welcome back to the Thinking Market. Today, I would love to make the case of the intellectual and aesthetic beauty of anarchism. So let's begin a little bit historically. A lot of people will say, oh, it was the anarcho communists of the 20th and 18th century that were the first anarchists. But I disagree. I do not want to give this the case. In fact, it was Chuang Tzu who existed in much of the 4th and 3rd century BC, a follower of Lao Tzu. And Chuang Tzu is considered the first anarchist in the history of human thought. He said such things as, there has been such a thing as letting mankind alone. There has never been such a thing as governing mankind with success. And he really pioneered this idea of spontaneous order, that good order results spontaneously when things are let alone, and that the world does not simply need governing. In fact, it should not be governed. So, over time, some of these followers of Confucius and Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, the Way, were really the first anarchists. Now, throughout the centuries, I'm sure there were other people who advocated for the ideas of freedom and understanding that, the society or the government that governs least governs best existed. And I guess really we get into much of the 18th century. Gustave de Molinari with the private production of defense, I believe in the 17th century, if I'm not mistaken, or the 18th century, was also another prominent pioneer of anarchist thought. And then we get into a lot of thinkers who you'll find in Michael Malice's The Anarchist Handbook, notably the anarcho-communists like Emma Goldman, Proudhon, and then we have who became the anarcho-capitalists, which is like Lysander Spooner, Murray Rothbard, many Austrian economists, and yours truly. So what is the case for anarcho-capitalism? Well, it's based in economics. The foundation is capitalism, this for-profit motive. And you'll hear people who are anarcho-communists saying, well, for-profit is evil. If you can't pay for something, then I'm sorry. Good luck. You're on the streets. You're starving. And this is not the case. And I'll make 2 points to this. One, look around you today in a capitalist society. The population has increased. Child mortality and infant mortality has decreased. So we have an abundance of food. People are not starving. People are getting medical treatment. The issue is the prices, the cronyist system. Actually, the socializing of money production has devalued money. So prices have increased. This creates the distortion of the market. So this is like the idea of a depression, an economic depression. Now, the mainstream idea is that, it was unlicensed banking that led to this economic boom and this recession, which we called the Depression of the the early 1930s. But this is not the case. Actually, it was the credit expansion. It was the boom of the 1920s that was not backed by savings, that then had to be followed by this, what was called the Depression, because prices have to adjust. That's what we're experiencing today. This boom, these bubbles, this inflation, and prices have to adjust. So when there's more money, each monetary unit is devalued. So now prices have to adjust, prices go up, and that's why they called it a depression. People were starving. People actually committed suicide. This is due to interventions and the distortions created by each government intervention in the market society. So going to this idea of for-profit, actually, the price mechanism and the profit motive is a form of communication by people. It's not just for profit, it's also profit and loss. If you're making losses, this tells people that what you're doing is either not good enough as an entrepreneur capitalist, or it's too expensive. So instead of just being to the ice cream entrepreneurial capitalist cart pushing salesman saying, like for example, this idea that, if you can't pay, sorry. Well, it's like, if you can't deliver, sorry, I'm not going to pay you for your product that's too expensive. And actually, who's then out of luck? So the whole idea of the market economy is that it's the truest form of a democracy, a market democracy, if you are an advocate of democracy. I'm just an advocate of freedom, of choice, having choices. Capitalism has delivered choices through the entrepreneurial profit and loss mechanism, which is a form of communication. So don't forget losses. Losses are very important. No one wants to take losses. So what do people do to avoid losses? They either drop their price, or they create a better quality good or at more quantity so they can also lower the price, or they become more ingenious, innovative in how they produce goods and deliver it to the market. So this foundation of capitalism actually is not evil at all. It's the best means for creating wealth, peace, prosperity, for relationships. It's actually this politicized society that breaks up friendships. The real way to have relationships in a society is the market process, not the politicized process. So let me make the argument for government. Governments, in fact, are more efficient at producing certain things. People say all the time, in anarchy, who will pay for the roads? Perhaps they are more efficient. I don't know exactly, if we lived in a society without markets for the production of hamburgers and cheeseburgers, how the production of hamburgers and cheeseburgers would look like in a free society. Similarly, I don't know how exactly the production of roads would occur. There are ways to pay for roads. They've been privatized historically, although that's not the best example for why something ought to be privatized. But I will make the case that, yeah, governments are also more efficient in producing military armaments and bombs and missiles. Actually, that's the whole military-industrial complex. It's a multi-trillion-dollar honeypot for people to make bombs and blow things up, let's say in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe, and then also contract out people to rebuild these places. So yeah, you can pay someone to dig a hole and fill it. What you're producing as a net benefit to society, I'm not really sure at all. I would say you're not producing anything. So in fact, in anarchy, there will be an underproduction of bombs, missiles, tactical nukes, because I don't think these would be the demanded and desired goods in a free society. Now, I guess something should be noted about the culture and history, the cultural perspective of people living in anarchy in a free society. I think, speaking for myself as an anarchist, I would say, yeah, I'm a violent person because I practice jujitsu. I'm a martial artist. So I'm, for sure, potentially violent, but I'm controlled. I think in a free society, we have more violence because people are uncontrolled. They don't control themselves. And only when you control yourself do you then have the opportunity to, I guess, live freely, to choose to live freely. If you can't control yourself, then maybe you find yourself in a situation where you're detained or arrested. So in anarchy, we wouldn't have the liberty to just be violent, to aggress people on the streets. It's because the streets are public that they're more dangerous. Like the public alleys, they're more dangerous than like being in a bar filled with drunk, testosterone-filled men. Do you know what I mean? Because there's private security. Whereas the street, should we have 1,000 cops roaming the street or should we have one cop roaming the street? I don't know, because we don't have a market. We don't have a price mechanism to determine how much security people are demanding. It's the bureaucracy. It's the socialism of the state, top-down central planning saying, well, let's just put some cops here and some cops there with no regards to the actual people demanding it. And it's not something you can vote on. Voting does not deliver what people actually want. It's only in the market process of demonstrating how much you value something by paying for it in the moment of action of paying something that you're demonstrating as a signal how much you demand something. So this is why economics is the foundation of anarchism. This is the intellectual case for anarchism, that it's through markets, through the profit and loss price mechanism system, that we can really have the goods we desire, like security, like a market for money, not the socialized fiat prone to recessions and bust money and banking system. Justice, the underproduction of punishment or restitution for a crime is injustice, and then the over severity of punishment or restitution for a crime is also injustice. But where should that restitution or punishment lie? That should also be left alone to be determined by the market. So with all these things, even education, public education is day prisons for children. Why are we all having to open the same book at the same page at the same time when people are different? We recognize people are different. People have different careers, yet we all have to go through the same public schooling system. Well, yes, because it's to control your mind as a form of public indoctrination. This is nothing new. This is, in fact, the history of the Prussian model of free and compulsory education. So, yeah, I want to just also say that when you begin to see the market process in effect and what it can produce and how it's being stopped today, democracy, this crony capitalist system, they're basically putting all these laws, regulations. We're losing freedoms all the time, yet they're blaming capitalism and freedom for the system we have today. The banking system, all these wars, a lot of leftists will be like, oh, this is the fault of capitalism. People having high medical and insurance bills. This is not a free market. They're super regulated. You have the option of like 3 or 4 insurance companies per state. It's one of the most regulated fields of all time. If you look at the history, David Beto's The Voluntary City, mutual aid societies, we had fraternities that would provide a lot of medical care for people at low cost. Now, we had churches, religion provided the role of charities before Social Security or welfare came into effect and regulated these institutions out of society. These were private charities. There's a great quote that's like, if we didn't have like a market for, I don't even remember, like making shirts, for example, and like the government provided shirts, and then all of a sudden we're living in a society where the government provides clothing, and we'd be like, actually, we can have a market for clothing. Like, think of all the choices and options and like the price of clothing. A lot of people would be like, well, I mean, I can't imagine a society where government doesn't produce clothing. Look, they produce it today, so they might as well be producing it tomorrow. Like, you're crazy. You're an anarchist? You think the market would provide clothing? They just do it for profit. No one would do it. There'd be one company. He'd become a monopolist. He'd provide all the clothing. He'd charge a high price. This is to the contrary of what we have today. But this is the logic that only common sense can save you from. If you think in this statist mindset, of this emotivist mindset, then you'll never see the alternative of the logic and beauty of the market mechanism existing, all the choices it provides. Go to the grocery stores. This is like relatively new in human history. All the choices of ice creams we have. This is a story I heard from Michael Malice about a North Korean refugee in South Korea who just ate ice cream, and they couldn't understand why they were getting fat because they didn't have ice cream in North Korea. And they couldn't understand why they were getting fat by just eating ice cream, because it's delicious. So yeah, in anarchy, in freedom, there is an issue of abundance, of material wealth, that how do we cope with our minds? Because material wealth, capitalism, is not the case that you'll be happy. It's not the case that you'll be content. Actually, yeah, we still have to deal with our minds. That's the one thing surgery can't replace. The market can't replace. We've avoided predation from animals and the primitive lifestyle of hunting, gathering, and avoiding cold winters. Now we have to deal with our mind, of being content, of finding passion. And yeah, we're sucked into a lot of this crony-regulated systems of social media, of politicization of society. But these are not the faults, I would say, of capitalism. These are the faults of regulationism. So many people got hooked on social media during the lockdown crisis, where people were forced to be in their homes. So what they do, they went online and they did drugs and they drank. And social media is a drug. Dopamine's a drug. Video games are a drug. They're addictive. I think in a way, video games is comparable to social media. Yeah, too much of it is probably not healthy at all. And yeah, too much of it becomes sickening to a point where originally a little bit is kind of fun. But that's why you have to be able to control yourself, regulate yourself. Because if you don't regulate yourself, yes, then the state will do it for you. And that's when you become a slave. And the great quote of Ain Shalmakin is that the average man does not want to be free. He simply wants to be safe. So if you want to choose to be safe and live in a servile state, then I believe you should be free to do so. But if someone wants to be free, then I believe they have the freedom to do so as well. And really, I think a great point from Jeff Deist is that people aren't against the free market and freedom for what it provides, but because they aren't in control of who then becomes the real leaders of society, of a meritocratic society. So with that, I will conclude. Hopefully I made the intellectual case, the beauty, the aesthetic. I mean, the beauty of the aesthetic is just like pretty simple. Look at private roads compared to public roads. Look at the private gated libertarian society roads versus the public roads of LA, for example. The beauty is there. The intellectual case is the economic case, which is the philosophical case. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much.